All right, everybody. So I have my co-presenter here with me from the first week of our Mosaic series, because what you don't know is that Jim and I left about half or more of the material that we had worked up on the cutting room floor, as it were, just for the sake of time. So we wanted to shoot a bonus video where we came back around to these key terms within the series, and then also really worked at applying them specifically to Kirkwood's context. So to start, I think all of you know now why diversity and inclusivity is so important to me, and how it shaped my own faith and my own practice as a pastor, my own understanding of Christianity. But I think it's important for you to hear from Jim why this stuff is important to him. So Jim, tell him your story about this.
Sure. So I grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia, very close to the city, somewhat racially diverse, but still separated. It's back in the 70s. And that kind of, I had the concept, largely white family, white Protestant family, growing up with that. And it wasn't until going through life, kind of the way I understood things, the way I learned, and then about 5 years ago, something cued me in to start listening to a couple key friends who are different racial backgrounds, and really hear what they were saying. You hear stories on the news of people that have things that happen against them, and you say, oh, that's just one person, or that's maybe they're stretching that a little bit, that they perceived it wrong. But when you have someone that you know or someone you trust, a neighbor across the street explains some stories, Steve, and a good friend from high school, Dre, and kind of hearing some of their stories and how they experience life differently, really kind of opened my eyes and said, wait, I'm not seeing the whole thing. I'm seeing a very biased, a biased view, like everyone does, but maybe you ought to pay attention to what others are seeing. And so I said, I need to explore this a little more. And I said, oh wow, there's a problem here that I need to learn more, and I need to be able to help others learn more.
So in a lot of ways, you've carried this with you a lot of your life.
Yes.
And it's been recently that you've been able to get the training that then now you can pass on to others, which is really neat.
Yeah.
All right, so Jim's got a thought experiment, a little exercise that he wants us to do. Then I'm going to come along after it with some theological reflection. Then we're going to move on into those key terms, and we'll work through those again. But all right, walk us through your exercise.
Sure. Want you to, this is going to help frame, again, think back to the definitions we talked about. This will help kind of frame them and give you a picture, an image where they might apply. So take a moment, close your eyes if you're not driving, if you want to, and think about a time where you felt different than everyone else. It could be something recent, past month, past year, or it could be something from your childhood that just sticks in your mind and has always been there. But take a moment to think about that. Okay. Now that you're in that moment, what word would you use to describe how you felt or how you feel in that moment? If you want to take a moment, if you can pause and write that word down, so we can use that to refer to as you go through the rest of the video. Some of the common words, maybe uncomfortable, isolated, outsider, scared, alone, outcast. Somebody said like a pioneer, a positive side in it. There can be some positives in being the person that's different. But now take that word you came up with in mind as we move into the rest of the video.
So often in churches, when we're not careful, we talk about sin, which itself is a very churchy word to begin with. We talk about sin only as if it's evil or wrongdoing or, on a greater scale perhaps, injustice. But consider this definition of human brokenness, which is what sin means, from a leading theologian. He says it's fourfold alienation. Alienation meaning estrangement. It's estrangement from God, it's estrangement from yourself, it's estrangement from creation, and of course it's estrangement or alienation from other people. Which means, biblically speaking, that what you heard Jim describe in his exercise is universal to the human condition. We all, on occasion, feel different from each other, or distant from each other, or don't understand each other, or deeper still, because of those things, we don't trust each other. This is just part of being human. And in saying that, isn't there at least some sense of comfort knowing that all of us, in our own particular way and with our own feelings about it, experience that? Jim and I both feel different, and that unites us. It actually makes us the same, right? Isn't that helpful? We also know that in the New Testament, this is precisely one of the things that Jesus came to heal. In passages like the second half of Ephesians chapter 2, we're told that Jesus came to break down, here's a great vivid metaphor. He came down to break down the walls of hostility that separate people. Isn't that how sometimes that we feel with each other? That in our differences, whether it's culture or upbringing, we feel like there's a wall between us and we can't even see each other clearly. And Jesus comes to break those things down. And as you heard Jim describe his exercise, know that at least in part, it is neurologically true how you will react to feeling different. When you and I feel different or uncomfortable or we don't trust somebody because of their difference, the first thing we're going to feel are negative emotions. Whether it's feeling uncomfortable or maybe feeling like you want to create physical distance to that person, our first encounter with something that is truly different almost always makes us feel negative first. It takes work to feel sameness. On the third Sunday of this series with Rachel Fisher, you heard she and I talk about the sameness and difference in her field that defines human history and how in the New Testament this is also true. It is easy and even natural to feel difference with people. It takes work, it takes effort, and it takes time to find sameness. Now, what Jim and I are going to do next is we're going to walk back through those key terms that he and I presented the first week, and we're going to go into greater detail about it or come at it from a different angle. So first, let's talk about the pair of terms, diversity and inclusivity.
Okay. So diversity and inclusion, I think most people have a pretty good grasp at what they mean. At least for me, one of the reasons why is they're both measurable. Being an engineer, measurable is a key way of understanding things. Diversity, you can look at, does Kirkwood look like our community around us? Does it have the same mix of race, of age, of gender, of sex, of economic status, education level? It'd be very easy to do a demographic survey of our congregation and what does the York or Pocosin or Hampton and Newport News have that we can do reflect that. There's a lot of companies that do that. It's not uncommon to do a lot of time when they have those employers or places or even for customers have those surveys. That's why they want to measure how they're doing in that diversity side. In Kirkwood, in some areas we're doing okay, and in some areas not so much. And I think most of us know what those are. On the other side, though, you have the inclusion, and the inclusion again is how much are those that diverse mix is it carried up into all aspects of the group. Do the people of the various groups, do they have the same voice on committees? Are they in leadership the same? Those are all important. And again, some areas are better than others. Even Chris mentioned a couple weeks ago with Rachel's that newcomers versus people that have been here a while, are they both represented on committees? And there's terminology that can hinder some of that. I think the term elder automatically biases against someone under 40 from becoming an elder because they're not an elder by that term, at least mentally by most English terminology. But there's no reason they can't be a leader at Kirkwood. So there's some things that even in terminology can really bias that. And it's also important to note that certain people have a tendency they've been so often put down in those environments and those discussions in those meetings or whatever, that they won't speak up. They're in that habit of not speaking up. And so in order to get their ideas and their opinions, sometimes you need to take a stop and specifically ask them, to encourage them to add their ideas too. And that's something, it's a skill in leading a meeting or leading a group, to make sure everyone has a chance to speak, and some people encourage them to do so.
So beneath these broad subjects of diversity and inclusivity, the social sciences do a lot of work at trying to quantify or verify a lot of what this looks like and why it benefits us. And I just want to draw our attention to two what are now incontrovertible facts in the social sciences about the necessity of diversity and inclusivity. The first is this, very simply: diversity and inclusivity make us better, and we are worse without them. This is true for you as an individual. Consider, this is Adam Grant, he's an organizational psychologist at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Penn, in his book, Think Again. Quote, "We often listen to views that make us feel good instead of ideas that make us think hard. And we often favor the comfort of our own convictions over the discomfort of doubt. Diversity and inclusivity introduces new points of view and perspectives that get you outside of that which only makes you feel comfortable. Your world expands through diversity and inclusivity." But see, it's not just true of you as an individual, it is true of groups. This is what social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who teaches at New York University, writes about diversity and inclusivity in groups. Fairly blunt. Quote, "When one voice controls everything, the entire group will go to hell in very predictable ways. When there is only one point of view that is consistently shared or present or that dominates a group, even in church, predictably that group is going to have blind spots that it does not see, or it will miss creative solutions that would have otherwise been available had diversity been present." Over and over again, the social sciences can demonstrate that if you give a problem or an issue or a complex strategic planning project, what you'll find is that a group that is diverse always fulfills the task, does the project better and faster than a group that is marked by sameness. So, know that at least from the viewpoint of the sciences, I certainly would say also from Scripture, that factually, you and I need the presence of diversity and inclusivity to be at our absolute best, whether that's you as an individual or if that's us as a congregation. Now here's the second incontrovertible fact about diversity and inclusivity. Encountering things that are different from us requires more energy than encountering things that are the same as us. This comes from the field of neurology. They can do brain scanning images of you talking to a friend that you've known as opposed to you talking to a stranger. You watching a movie that you've seen before versus you watching a movie that you haven't seen before. And you already know what I'm going to tell you. It takes significantly more energy for you to encounter something that's distinct or different, or to listen to someone who comes at things from a different point of view. Why is that important to know? Well, in America right now, people are chronically busy and chronically tired, meaning we are usually overstressed, over-anxious, and we're not doing the things necessary to refill our depleted energy stores. Does it not surprise you then, or it should not surprise you then, that our country in this moment, and yes, even its churches, are struggling monumentally with the issues of diversity and inclusivity? We simply don't have the energy to deal with it. Part of why we love to be tribal and polarized and only listen to people who already agree with us or with whom we already agree is because it's easier. And it just doesn't demand as much from us. So, practically, if you and I want to embrace diversity or inclusivity of any kind, right? Whether it's tenure in the church, how long someone's been a Christian, a young person or an older person, doesn't matter what the diversity is. In order for us to do this well, we have got to prioritize self-care and we have to prioritize recreation and rest. Otherwise, our brains simply can't do it. All right, next set of words. We're going to move on to equality and equity.
Okay. So just to refresh, equality, everyone gets the same. Basically the idea that you come from the same starting point. Equity means adapting what is provided so to give everyone a fair chance to succeed, whatever that it looks like, that success looks like. Two basic examples. If you think to education, the way you teach should be adapted to the various gifts of that student, whether that be a student with ADHD or a gifted student and or someone on the spectrum. You should adapt to that because they start at a different point, therefore they may need extra help in a different way in order to be their best. And that best is different for each one of them, and that's part of that diversity too. Example at church, when a visitor comes in, we should adjust our feedback a bit based off their response. We don't treat every visitor the same. There are some visitors who are very outgoing and come up, shake your hand, want to meet a bunch of people. There's other ones that'll come in, take the bulletin and go sit in a corner and may say hi and say something during the greeting to a few people, but just want to stay in their corner, and that's okay. We don't have to go out and attack them and swarm them, but we want to make them feel welcome. So there's a need to adapt that. And that's really all equity is trying to find what works best for each person and being aware that, look, this person is an individual with their own unique diversity and finding a way to help them become all they can.
So I'll piggyback on that. I think Jim and I would both guess that equality is a concept that you're more familiar with and probably even more comfortable with. Equity might be a little new to you and perhaps even a little uncomfortable. So what I'd like to do is give you the chance to Christianize the idea of equity. And I'm going to do that through 3 citations here, all of which come from Christian sources that are trying to explain equity from a Christian viewpoint. Okay, so the first is from a leading Christian poverty empowerment ministry on the West Coast, very much like Thrive, who did a presentation for us in the 2nd week of this series. Here's how they explain their practice of equity. It is to, quote, help everyone take maximum responsibility for their own lives. That's really good, right? Because the equal part is we all want to be responsible for our own lives so that perhaps even then we can help other people be responsible for theirs. But what the quote assumes is we're not all starting from the same place. We all may have different needs that get us to the place where we can be responsible for ourselves and for those we love, and then expand outward to our world and our neighbors. So as Jim said, think about how that might be different for the different people at Kirkwood. What helps an older person who's housebound and struggling to get rides to a doctor's appointment exercise maximum responsibility for their life? How about a teenager who's maybe on the cusp of graduation and trying to sort through what they're going to do in life? See, it's different, right? Maximum responsibility is the equal part. Equity is us figuring out for each life how to help them do that. All right, now this is from church history. This is St. Ambrose from the 300s AD. St. Ambrose, if you don't know that name, he was a key figure in the conversion of the person who would become St. Augustine. Really important person from this period of church history. So he writes, quote, "You are not making a gift of what is yours to the poor, but you are giving them back what is theirs. You have been appropriating things that are meant instead for the common use of everyone." That's the phrase we're going to come back to. The earth belongs to everyone, not only to the rich, end quote. So what Ambrose is saying is that there are things in your life, whether it's part of your money or it could be physical things that you have, those things are not just intended for you and yours. They may well be intended for what he calls the common use of everyone, because not everybody has the same toolbox or set of assets as somebody else. So I'll give you a concrete example. I've known a Christian family who they were well off enough that they had an RV that was in really good shape. And their family loved to take trips in the RV in the summertime all over wherever they could drive in North America. But part of their stewardship was recognizing that not everybody is so well off to be able to afford an RV or to be able to rent one. So they opened it up to people in their church family and even to people in their neighborhood, saying, you are welcome to use our RV. And in some cases, we won't even charge you for it, so that you can go experience the wonder of our large country, that it is diverse culturally and geographically, and you can experience the world that we have. That's looking at a particular part of their life, saying, maybe we can use this for the common use of everyone, right? All right, last. This is Dr. Nicole Flores. She teaches religious studies out at the University of Virginia, and she's a devout Christian, does a lot of work in Christian nonprofit circles. She wrote this in a blog when she was parenting her toddler and her preschooler. So here's the quote. "I've been spending a lot of time doing Toddler Theology 101, explaining how Jesus teaches us that when we share, we actually make more to go around, rather than have less to keep for ourselves." When we meet somebody where they are and help them begin to address the needs that they specifically have, we should not view that as a loss. Actually, it's a gain. And it's not just a gain because we're loving and there is a great joy in giving. It's a gain for that person. But it is not just a gain for that person. Eventually, it's going to be a gain for other people. Not through us, but through that other person, right? You catch that? When we practice equity, it multiplies itself. And we affect people and help them take responsibility for their lives. And as they do, they positively impact others. And the ripple effect is what Jesus would call his kingdom. All right, last, we're going to talk about the 3 sets of words that we combined together the first week of the Mosaic series. We're going to talk about prejudice, stereotyping, and unconscious bias.
So prejudice and stereotype, there's terminologies that have been around for quite a while. Again, a lot of people have a fairly good understanding of those. Stereotyping is something that you or I believe about another group of people. Oftentimes it's based on a little bit of fact, a little bit of experience. And it can be good, it can be bad, and and when I say it can be true, but it's true on a general basis. It's never true for everyone of that group. Think about some of the stereotypes you have about people that attend the church down the street, and what that comes to mind. There's certain stereotypes there. Is everyone like that in those churches? No, but there is something about that helps you to think that and come to that conclusion. Prejudice, on the other hand, is thinking a certain way about a person or a group with no experience or reasoning to base it on. What people groups have you had little or no interaction with? If you don't have the interaction and you're only hearing a little bit here or there, that's where that can come about more often. And that should be a little more careful about that the prejudice side. What opinions do you have about those people, and how is that affecting your actions at Kirkwood? And lastly, unconscious bias. And again, I mentioned this is my kind of the biggest eye opener for me when I went through my training at work. Hopefully by now you've looked at some of the resources that are on the sermons page or shared on Facebook or the Monday memos about what some of the videos. Some of the articles that Chris has shared to kind of help lead into what explain this and help you to kind of experience it and understand it a little more for yourself. But again, the most important thing is it's everyone has it. It is ingrained in us. It is an important part of what God made us to be because it's important for how humans survive in society and the world. Because there's times that we need that quick reaction and we can't take time to think about things. So there's that has to be just pattern matching, go for it. And that's where it comes from. Also remember that unconscious bias is not good or bad. It is, it's there. And it's, whether that reaction it's not, doesn't mean you're a bad person because you unconsciously think of a group of people in a certain way, or that comes to your mind right away. But what you can take responsibility for is, as Rachel echoed me, having that second thought, that choice as to what you consider, and then finally your actions. Those are all conscious. You can recognize that bias once you learn what it is. You can recognize it. You can then take that consideration as you go through, and adjust your responses when you do that as second thought or that action. You change your behavior accordingly.
So let's get beneath that just for a second. So think about some of what Jim just said about unconscious bias, that it's there, it's hereditary, it is part of who we are. You and I don't choose it. We just are. And we will always have a first thought, but then the really important thing is the second thought that comes next, or the first action. Okay, keep that in mind and think about some of the other things we've talked about in this series, like human beings are just naturally inclined to group together with people who are like them. It actually takes way more purpose and intentionality to group with people that aren't. Or you've heard Rachel and I, when we talked about anthropology, talk about the fact that human beings, there is this ebb and flow of majority and minority groups. And very often majority groups are guilty of ignoring or marginalizing the voices of minority groups. This just seems to be baked into the cake of the human race. Now, what's my point? So very often when we talk about Christian virtue, like gentleness or wisdom or love or patience, we talk about it as if it's this very quick, easy, thoughtless act. And I suppose we've all had the experience of that, where we had a really good prayer time in the morning, we went an extra 10 minutes in our devotional, and we entered the day just upbeat, positive, and ready. And I suppose on days like that, it is easier to forgive or be patient when you encounter whatever it is that you do at work or at home or out in the community. Fair enough. But that is not the whole story. Consider, please, this citation from Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis about Christian virtue. And see if it doesn't sync up with what you've heard Jim and I share, as well as others in this series, in regard to Christian virtue. Quote, "You must ask for God's help. Even when you have done so, it may seem to you for a long time that no help, or less help than you need, is being given. Never mind that. After each failure, ask forgiveness, pick yourself up, and try again. Very often, what God first helps us toward is not the virtue itself, but the willpower to always try again." End quote. What's my point? To live as a Christian and carry about with you and embody those virtues and values that we hold dear, like grace, being a peacemaker, loving people regardless of who they are, how alike or dislike you they are. You need to just know that it's hard work. And it's actually easier for you not to do those things than it is for you to do those things. So, very often, choosing to behave in a way that is instinctually human may not be virtuous from the standpoint of Christianity, but it sure is easy. So if you and I are committed to living out these principles that you've heard in this series, and Jim and I have again talked through today, you are really signing up for something that's going to be trial and error. It is going to be fall down and get back up. And none of us are great at this, but it is a worthwhile goal. And for our lives and our communities and our church and our world to look different, it takes us being willing to sign up to the long haul of Christian virtue. All right, so we're going to end today two ways. We're going to kind of bring it down to the grassroots level, and Jim is going to give us 3 words that begin with C that help us pull together a lot of what you've heard today, as well as in the series at large. Words that you can carry with you as you try to live out the ideas of diversity, inclusivity, equality, equity, and so forth. And then I'm going to finish with a quote, and I'll explain the quote when we get there. Go ahead, Jim.
And these 3 words, they all really reflect back on respect. That's really how you implement, or you in your life, respecting the different cultures, respecting different people, and that's really what it boils down to. It's nothing fancy or surprising. That's really what it is. 3 C's are communicate, collaborate, and care. Communicate. As I started, if you recall, when I started my interest in diversity, I started with honestly listening to people, people that I knew and people that I knew that were different than me. I don't trust half the stuff I see in the news. I think I'm not alone in that. So when people say things in the news, I take it as a skeptic. But talking to someone that I know, I can say, no, wait, they're telling a real story, something that they really experienced, and it strikes home a little more. And I can really say, wait, there's something I recognized here, that there's a problem. And if you don't have people in your life that are different than you, I encourage you to try and change that. You don't have to go and camp out in a totally different neighborhood. That's not what it takes, but it could be getting involved with groups that may be a little bit of a stretch. There's still an interest in some way, or it could be a community group or something. Just get involved. I've seen people that go to a restaurant and will sit down with a bigger table and share a table with people that are someone they don't know. And you go during a crowded lunchtime, so it's reasonable to share a table like that. Or something different. But try and find ways to connect with people that are different than you in any one of those fashions. As Chris mentioned, it's very easy to get caught up in people that are like you because it's comfortable. So to go out and create that communication with people that are different than you. And of course, as you do that, you want to listen. Honestly, listen. You're not out there to preach and share your ideas, but you're there to listen and hear their stories. And of course, you use humility. That your experiences are no better than theirs with that. The second one is collaborate. There's lots of ways to work together. When you work with others, again, you learn more, you share, so it creates that comfort and that bond. We do the wheelchair ramp where we go with Port, but there's also ones you can collaborate with people that are outside of Kirkwood as well. Again, to work together, to experience, to learn and share. And again, you see there's a common bond to begin with, and now you can grow that and it helps connect you people that are different than you. And lastly, care. We'll never be able to truly understand someone else's experience, someone else's life. We'll never be able to get in their brain and truly experience that. But we can try and have empathy for them. Again, it goes back to that listening and appreciate trying to understand that and extend that trust. Because if you don't have that trust, then you can't really care and they'll build that trust up as part of that.
So I thought a good end point for this bonus material that Jim and I have passed along, but really an encapsulation of everything this series has tried to communicate, is this citation from a speech given to the United Nations Commission on Human Rights in 2001 by the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Desmond Tutu is a personal spiritual hero of mine, and he was instrumental in both the overthrow of apartheid in South Africa, but then also allowing a new South Africa to be birthed when the minority white lost power to the majority black in the country. And yet, there was not bloodshed. There was a coming together to form a new nation under the leadership of Nelson Mandela. So it was around that time in his work that he gave a citation to the United Nations. And here are 2.5 paragraphs from that. And you will hear everything Jim and I have described, as well as what we've talked about in the series, as well as, frankly, the hope of the world in this. Quote, "We live in a universe marked by diversity. It is a law of the cosmos and of our very being. We are made to exist in a life that should be marked by cooperation, interdependence, sharing, caring, compassion, and complementarity. We should celebrate our diversity. We should exult in our differences. They should not be a source of hostility, separation, and alienation. We should live in solidarity, in friendship, in helpfulness, and in unselfishness, as sisters and brothers in God's one human family. Anything else, as we have experienced, is disaster. Our survival as a species will depend not on unbridled power lacking moral direction, or on eliminating those who are different and seeking only those who think, speak, behave, and look like ourselves. That is the way of stagnation and ultimately death. We must respect even our adversaries and see them not as ogres, dehumanized and demonized, but as fellow human beings deserving respect for their personhood and dignity. There is room for everyone and for every culture, ethnicity, country, and point of view. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, if we don't learn to live as brothers, we will die together as fools." End quote. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.